Welcome to What If Sleepstorian, where the boundaries between worlds dissolve and beloved characters step beyond the pages of their original tales. Here, in the hushed hours between day and night, a legendary detective might find himself bound by necessity to a criminal mastermind, their fates entwined as they face a shadow darker than either could imagine, where cunning meets chaos in a dance of intellect and dread. Each story begins with a simple question: what if? And unfolds into a gentle tapestry of intrigue, wonder and dreams. Tonight, we begin with something a little melancholic, a tale woven from the fog of late Victorian London, where gaslights flicker against the weight of secrets and the air hums with a promise of danger. If these stories bring you comfort or spark your imagination, I'd be grateful if you'd like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. Let me know where in the world you're listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. So dim the lights, find your most comfortable position, and let these whispered narratives carry you softly towards sleep. Picture London in 1891. Not the city of polished dreams, but a raw, restless sprawl where survival was carved from grit and shadow. The air hangs heavy with the scent of wet stone and horse dung, undercut by the faint sweetness of bread baking in a distant oven, spoiled by the acrid bite of factory soot. The streets pulse with sound, the clatter of hooves on cobblestone, the cries of vendors peddling wilted vegetables, the low moan of a steamer on the Thames. Run your hand along a brick wall and you'd feel the damp grime cling to your skin, cold and unyielding. A sip of tea from a street stall would taste sharp, tinged with the metallic edge of water drawn from aging pipes. This is a city of stark contrasts. Wealth glittering in chandelier-lit parlours, while poverty festers in cramped, unheated rooms, where every breath feels like a negotiation with the world. Imagine standing in those streets, your boots sinking into the muck, the chill of the fog seeping through your coat. This wasn't the London of grand tales or heroic exploits. It was a place where the poor patched their clothes with scraps, where the rich locked their doors against the night, where every alley held a secret and every shadow a threat. Yet there was a strange beauty in it. The way the fog softened the city's edges, the way gaslights danced on the river, the way two brilliant minds, long at odds, were about to collide in a way no one could have foreseen. In a modest room above Baker Street, Sherlock Holmes sat by a single lamp, its glow casting sharp angles across his face. The air smelled of tobacco and old books, warmed by the soft crackle of a fire in the hearth. His fingers steepled beneath his chin, his eyes fixed on the rain-streaked window, where droplets traced slow paths like tears on glass. Holmes was a man who saw the world as a puzzle, each piece waiting to be fitted into place. But tonight, his mind churned with unease. On the desk before him lay a letter, its edges worn from careful handling, its words written in a hand both elegant and menacing. The game is no longer yours alone. Meet me where the river bends, midnight 3 nights hence. No signature, only a symbol, a single, graceful F. Its curves both beautiful and sinister, the mark of Fantomas. Across the city, in a shadowed study lined with forbidden texts and the faint hum of machinery, Professor James Moriarty stood, his fingers tracing the edge of a map marked with lines of power and influence. The air here was colder, sharper, laced with the metallic tang of ink and the musty weight of secrets hoarded too long. Moriarty, a man who wove empires from shadows, felt the unfamiliar sting of uncertainty. His letter, identical to Holmes's, bore the same F, the same summons to the river bend. He had built a network that stretched from London to Vienna, yet this phantom, Fantomas, threatened to unravel it all with a single chaotic stroke. What must it have been like to live in a city so alive with danger, where every choice felt like a step toward an unseen edge? The fog was not just weather. It was a veil, hiding truths and treachery alike. Holmes and Moriarty, two men who thrived on control, were now bound by a shared threat, their rivalry forced into a fragile truce. The letter was no mere invitation, it was a challenge, a spark that could ignite a fire across Europe. Holmes rose from his chair, his movements precise, the firelight catching the sharp lines of his profile. He slipped the letter into his pocket, its words etched in his mind, and stepped into the night. The streets were slick with rain, the air heavy with the scent of mud and coal. He moved with purpose, his eyes scanning every face, every shadow, hearing the city's rhythms, the creak of a cart, the distant shout of a drunkard, the soft splash of the Thames against its banks. Moriarty, too, was on the move, his carriage cutting through the fog like a blade through silk. His mind was a labyrinth of calculations, weighing trust against betrayal, power against survival. The river bend was a place he knew, a quiet stretch of the Thames where warehouses loomed like silent giants, where secrets were traded in whispers. He stepped from his carriage, his boots silent on the damp ground, his presence a ripple in the night. As midnight approached, the city seemed to hold its breath. The river bend waited, its waters black and still, its banks shrouded in mist. Holmes arrived first, a shadow among shadows, his coat pulled tight against the damp. Moriarty followed, his approach deliberate, his eyes gleaming in the faint glow of a distant gaslight. They stood across from each other, the air between them thick with suspicion, the weight of their history pressing down like the fog itself. Holmes spoke first, his voice low, cutting through the mist. "You received it too, Moriarty, the mark of Fantomas." It was a statement, not a question, heavy with the weight of their shared predicament. Moriarty's lips curved into a smile, cold and sharp. "Indeed, Holmes, it seems we have a mutual problem. A rare convergence of interests, wouldn't you say?" The river lapped softly against the docks, its rhythm steady, relentless. The scent of mud and decay hung in the air, mingling with the faint tang of salt from the distant sea. Holmes's fingers tightened around the letter in his pocket, his mind racing through fragments of evidence. Thefts, murders, coded messages, all bearing the Phantom's mark. Moriarty's gaze was steady, calculating, already planning moves in a game neither fully understood. They were not allies, not yet. But they were no longer just enemies. Fantomas loomed over them, a shadow that cared nothing for their rivalry, their pride, their carefully constructed worlds. In the quiet of that river bend, beneath the weight of a city that never slept, they began to speak, of plans, of dangers, of a threat that could consume them both. The fog thickened, the stars hid behind a veil of smoke, and the game, vast and perilous, began to unfold. The river's whisper was a soft, unyielding pulse, its dark waters catching the faint glow of gaslights as the fog curled tighter around the two figures at the Thames bend. Sherlock Holmes stood with his back to the current, his silhouette sharp against the mist, the damp air clinging to his coat like a second skin. Across from him, Professor James Moriarty's eyes gleamed with a cold precision, his gloved hands clasped as if to anchor his thoughts. The night smelled of mud and coal, the faint tang of rust from nearby docks mingling with the sour edge of the city's breath. The distant clatter of a lake carriage echoed, then faded, leaving only the lap of water and the weight of their words. In this fragile moment, two minds, long at war, stood on the precipice of something new, not trust, but a necessity as sharp as a blade. Holmes's voice cut through the stillness, low and deliberate, each syllable measured like a step on thin ice. Fantomas does not play for gain, Moriarty. His moves are not those of a thief or a tyrant. They are theatrical. He paused, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the shadows, as if the Phantom himself might emerge from the fog. A string of crimes across Europe, Vienna, Lisbon, Berlin, each marked by that F, each defying pattern. He wants us to chase him. Moriarty tilted his head, his smile thin, almost serpentine. Theatrical, you say? A generous term for madness. His voice was smooth, a velvet glove over a steel grip, carrying the weight of a man who saw the world as a chessboard, and himself as its master. But madness has a rhythm, Holmes. He seeks to unravel us. Your pursuit of justice. My web of influence. The question is not what he does, but why. He stepped closer, his boots silent on the slick ground, his words a whisper meant for the night alone. What does Fantomas gain by forcing our hands? The air was heavy, the scent of river mud sharp and bitter, the cold seeping through layers of wool and resolve. Picture this London, its pulse thrumming beneath a skin of soot and stone. The streets were not kind in 1891. They were a maze of hunger and haste, where the poor mended their boots with rags, and the rich hide their fears behind locked gates. The sound of a street singer's voice might drift through the fog, thin and trembling, only to be drowned by the rattle of a beggar's tin. Touch the world here, and you'd feel its edges, the splintered wood of a market crate, the slick chill of a lamp-post, the rough weave of a shawl against the wind. A bite of bread from a corner stall would be dense, gritty, tasting faintly of ash from the oven's smoke. This was a city where survival was a daily bargain, where beauty and brutality walked hand in hand. What must it have felt like to stand in such a place, where every shadow could hide a knife, every whisper a betrayal? Holmes and Moriarty, two men who thrived on control, were now bound by a threat that laughed at their mastery. Fantomas was no mere criminal. He was a storm, leaving chaos in his wake, a stolen painting in Paris, a diplomat's death in Vienna, a bank vault emptied in Berlin, each act bold, precise, and maddeningly elusive. The letter with its elegant F was not just a taunt, it was a gauntlet thrown at their feet, daring them to play a game where the rules were unknown. Holmes drew a small notebook from his pocket, its leather cover worn smooth by use, and his mind sketched a map of Europe, pins marking each of Fantomas' strikes, threads connecting them in a web that refused to cohere. "He moves too swiftly," he murmured, his breath visible in the chill. "No single man could cover such ground, not without resources, allies, or—" He hesitated, the thought unfinished, as if speaking it might give it form. Moriarty's eyes flickered, catching the pause. "Or a mind equal to ours," he finished, his voice a low hum, like the drone of a distant machine. "You see it, don't you? He's not merely a shadow. He's a mirror, reflecting our own ambitions, our own flaws." He turned to the river, its surface a black mirror under the fog, and his fingers twitched as if tracing invisible calculations. But mirrors can be shattered, Holmes. We need only find the flaw in his design. The city stirred around them, its sounds muted but relentless. The creak of a dock piling, the soft splash of water, the distant toll of a church bell marking the hour. The fog was a living thing, wrapping the world in secrecy, and in its embrace the two men spoke of plans that felt like treason against their own natures. Holmes, the seeker of truth, and Moriarty, the architect of shadows, were no longer just rivals. They were players in a game where the stakes were their very existence. Fantomas had forced their hands, and the river bend was only the beginning. Holmes paced a slow circle, his boots sinking into the damp earth, his mind sifting through fragments. A coded note found in a Paris gutter, a witness's trembling account of a masked figure, a symbol carved into a Lisbon doorstep. "He leaves traces," he said, almost to himself, "but they are deliberate, like lures in a trap. He wants us to follow, but not to catch him. Not yet." Moriarty nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon, where the city's lights blurred into the mist. A performance then, but every performer craves an audience. He has chosen us, Holmes, not as foes, but as witnesses to his chaos. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "We must play his game, but on our terms. A meeting of minds, yours and mine, to outwit a phantom who thinks himself untouchable." The air grew colder, the fog thicker, as if the city itself were conspiring to keep their words hidden. Holmes's eyes met Moriarty's, and for a moment the weight of their rivalry hung between them. Years of pursuit and evasion, of traps set and sprung, of a dance that had defined them both. Yet now they stood on the same side of the board, their pieces aligned against a shadow that threatened to topple it all. They spoke on, their voices low, weaving a plan as delicate as the fog itself. Holmes proposed a network of informants, eyes in every city where Fantomas had struck. Moriarty countered with coded messages, a web of communication to track the Phantom's movements without exposing their own. Each concession was a battle, each agreement a wound to their pride, but the F on the letter bound them to this uneasy alliance. As the church bell tolled one, the night seemed to shift, the fog parting briefly to reveal the faint outline of a warehouse across the river. The two men fell silent, their thoughts turning inward, their plans taking shape like shadows in the mist. The game was no longer just theirs. It belonged to Fantomas, and he was watching, waiting, his laughter a whisper in the dark. They parted without words, Holmes slipping back into the streets, his figure swallowed by the fog, Moriarty retreating to his carriage, its wheels silent on the cobblestones. The river bend was empty once more, but the air held the weight of their meeting, the promise of a chase that would span cities and continents. The Thames flowed on, carrying their secrets downstream, and the city, ever watchful, settled back into its restless sleep. The fog had settled deeper into London's bones, wrapping the city in a shroud that muffled its heartbeat. The Thames flowed on, its waters a quiet murmur beneath the weight of the night, carrying the echoes of a meeting that had shifted the world's undercurrents. Sherlock Holmes moved through the streets, his steps silent on the slick cobblestones, his mind a storm of calculations and suspicions. The air was sharp with the scent of coal dust and the faint bitter tang of the river, the chill biting through his coat as he wove through alleys where gaslights flickered like uncertain promises. Across the city, Professor James Moriarty sat in his carriage, the velvet interior a stark contrast to the damp world outside, his fingers tapping a rhythm only he could hear. The carriage wheels whispered against the stone, and the night smelled of oil and wet leather, a reminder of the city's ceaseless grind. Picture this world, where every corner holds a story, every shadow a secret. In 1891, London was a city of edges, sharp and unforgiving, where the poor scraped by in tenements that reeked of mildew and despair, while the wealthy dined on pheasant and claret in rooms warmed by roaring fires. The streets were alive with the clink of coins in a vendor's hand, the soft thud of boots on muddy paths, the distant wail of a child lost in the maze of Whitechapel. Touch the world here, and you'd feel its weight. The rough weave of a beggar's coat, the cold iron of a railing slick with dew, the splintered edge of a crate abandoned by the docks. A bite of an apple from a market stall would be tart, its flesh bruised from a long journey, a faint taste of dust clinging to its skin. This was a city where beauty was fleeting, snatched from the jaws of hardship, where every breath was a reminder of the fight to endure. Holmes's mind was a blade, cutting through the fog of uncertainty as he retraced his steps to Baker Street. The meeting with Moriarty lingered like a bitter taste, their words a delicate dance of necessity and mistrust. Fantomas was no ordinary foe. He was a spectre, a name whispered in the underbelly of Europe's cities, from the opium dens of Paris to the shadowed cafes of Vienna. His crimes were not just acts of theft or murder, they were performances, each one bolder, more audacious, as if he were painting chaos across a canvas of order. Holmes's fingers brushed the letter in his pocket, its F a brand that burned in his thoughts. The Phantom was playing a game, and London was only the opening move. In his study, Moriarty leaned over his desk, a map of Europe spread before him, its edges curling like the pages of a forbidden book. The air was heavy with the scent of ink and wax, the faint hum of a gas lamp casting shadows that danced across the walls. His mind, a labyrinth of logic and ambition, traced the paths of Fantomas' strikes. A bank vault in Berlin, emptied without a trace. A diplomat's death in Lisbon, staged as a suicide. A painting stolen from a Paris salon, replaced with a mocking sketch of that same F. Each act was a thread in a web Moriarty could not yet unravel, and the realization stung like a wound. He was no stranger to power, to bending the world to his will, but Fantomas was a force that defied control, a storm that laughed at his carefully laid plans. What must it have been like to live in a world where every certainty could be undone by a single unseen hand? To walk streets where the air was thick with suspicion, where the flicker of a lamp could hide a predator? Holmes and Moriarty, two men who had built their lives on mastery, were now forced to confront a shadow that moved faster, struck harder, and vanished without a trace. Their alliance was a fragile thing, a house of cards built on mutual need, each man watching the other for the first sign of betrayal. Holmes reached Baker Street, the familiar creak of the stairs under his boots a small comfort in the chaos of his thoughts. His rooms were a sanctuary, the air warm with the scent of tobacco and the faint sweetness of Mrs. Hudson's tea left cooling on the table. He sank into his chair, the fire casting a soft glow across the clutter of books and papers, and spread the letter before him. His eyes traced the F, its curves both elegant and menacing, a signature that spoke of a mind as sharp as his own, yet unbound by reason. He began to write, his pen scratching softly, listing every detail he knew of Fantomas. The cities, the crimes, the whispers. The list grew, but the pattern remained elusive, a puzzle with pieces that refused to fit. Across the city, Moriarty's study was a fortress of secrets, its walls lined with books in languages few could read, its air thick with the weight of his ambition. He poured a glass of brandy, its sharp amber scent cutting through the musty stillness, and studied the map before him. His fingers traced lines from London to Paris, from Vienna to Berlin, each mark a wound to his empire. Fantomas was not just a threat. He was a rival, a mind that challenged Moriarty's dominion over the shadows. He leaned back, his eyes narrowing, and began to draft a message, a coded summons to his network, a call for eyes and ears in every city where the phantom had struck. The words were precise, cloaked in cipher, a language of power that only his agents would understand. The night deepened, the city settling into a restless quiet. The fog pressed against windows, muffling the sounds of late carriages and distant footsteps. Holmes and Moriarty, separated by miles but bound by purpose, were already moving their pieces across the board. Holmes sent word to his irregulars, the street urchins and cabbies who saw what others missed, their eyes sharp in the city's underbelly. Moriarty dispatched his own messengers, their paths hidden in the shadows of dockyards and opium dens, their loyalty bought with coin and fear. The game was taking shape, a cat-and-mouse chase that stretched beyond London's borders, into the heart of a continent teetering on the edge of chaos. Holmes closed his notebook, his mind racing even as his body stilled. He stepped to the window, the glass cold against his palm, and looked out at the city he knew better than his own reflection. The fog was a veil, hiding truths and dangers alike, but he saw through it, saw the threads that connected London to Paris, to Vienna, to the unknown. Fantomas was out there, a phantom who thrived on the unravelling of order, and Holmes would find him, not for justice, not yet, but for the challenge, for the need to solve what could not be solved. Moriarty, too, stood at his window, the brandy glass forgotten in his hand. The city sprawled before him, its lights dimmed by the fog, a kingdom he had claimed through intellect and will. But Fantomas was a crack in that kingdom, a flaw in the machine he had built. He would not allow it to spread. His mind turned to the next move, to the delicate balance of working with Holmes, a man he respected and despised in equal measure. The alliance was a means to an end, a temporary truce in service of a greater victory. The clock struck 2, its chime a soft echo in the night. The city slept, but its shadows did not. Holmes and Moriarty, each in their own world, were already planning, their thoughts weaving together like threads in a tapestry yet to be finished. The river flowed on, carrying their secrets toward the sea, and somewhere in the dark Fantomas watched, his laughter a whisper in the wind, The night had grown heavier, the fog a thick veil that pressed against London's skin, muffling its restless pulse. The Thames whispered its secrets, its dark waters catching the flicker of gaslights like scattered embers as the city settled into the uneasy quiet of the early hours. Sherlock Holmes sat in his Baker Street rooms, the air warm with the scent of pipe smoke and the faint lingering sweetness of tea gone cold. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, casting shadows across the clutter of books, maps, and papers that spilled over his desk. His fingers traced the edge of the letter, its elegant F a silent challenge, a riddle that refused to yield. Across the city, in a study cloaked in shadow, Professor James Moriarty leaned over his own desk, the air sharp with the tang of ink and the faint hum of a gas lamp. His map of Europe lay spread before him, its lines and symbols a testament to his empire, now threatened by the same phantom that haunted Holmes. The night was alive with their thoughts, two minds moving in parallel, bound by a fragile alliance and a shared enemy, Fantomas. Picture this London of 1891, a city caught between grandeur and grit, where every street was a story, every shadow a warning. The air was thick with the scent of coal smoke and damp earth, the faint sweetness of roasted chestnuts from a corner vendor mingling with the sour bite of an open sewer. The sounds were a symphony of survival, the clatter of hooves on cobblestone, the hoarse cry of a newsboy calling out the evening's headlines, the soft creak of a barge on the Thames. To touch this world was to feel its roughness, the splintered wood of a market stall, the slick chill of a lamppost under your palm, the coarse weave of a shawl against the wind. A sip of ale in a smoky tavern would burn the throat, its bitterness laced with the grit of a city that never rested. This was a place where hope was hard won, where the poor stitched their lives together with scraps and the rich hide their fears behind velvet curtains, where beauty and brutality were two sides of the same coin. Holmes's mind was a storm, its current swirling around the enigma of Fantomas. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking softly, and closed his eyes, letting the fragments of evidence drift through his thoughts like leaves on the river. A theft in Vienna, bold and precise, the vault left untouched but for a single F carved into its door. A murder in Lisbon, staged as a suicide, the victim's hand clutching a note with that same mark. A coded message in Berlin, intercepted by chance, its words a taunt that led nowhere. Each act was a performance, a flourish meant to dazzle and distract, but Holmes saw beyond the spectacle. Fantomas was not just a criminal, he was a strategist, a mind that thrived on chaos, leaving clues not to be caught but to be chased. The detective's fingers tapped a rhythm on the armrest, his thoughts racing through possibilities, discarding the impossible, narrowing the improbable to a single elusive truth. In his study, Moriarty's gaze was fixed on the map, his fingers tracing the paths of Fantomas' strikes, as if they were veins in a living thing. The air was heavy with the scent of wax and old paper, the faint metallic edge of ink lingering from the messages he had drafted. His empire was vast, a web of influence that stretched from London's docks to the salons of Paris, but Fantomas was a blade cutting through its threads. A bank in Berlin, its reserves vanished overnight. A diplomat in Vienna, silenced before he could speak. A shipment of arms in Lisbon, rerouted to hands unknown. Each act bore the phantom's mark, a challenge to Moriarty's control, a mockery of his carefully laid plans. He sipped his brandy, its sharp warmth a fleeting comfort, and his mind turned to the alliance with Holmes, a partnership as unnatural as it was necessary. Moriarty was no stranger to manipulation, but this game required a different kind of finesse, a balance of trust and treachery with a man who saw through lies as easily as he did. The city outside their windows was a living thing, its pulse steady but strained, its streets a maze where secrets were currency. The fog was a conspirator, hiding truths and dangers alike, its tendrils curling through alleys and over rooftops. Holmes rose from his chair, his movements deliberate, and crossed to the window, the glass cold against his fingers. The street below was quiet, save for the soft shuffle of a late-night wanderer, their figure blurred by the mist. He thought of the river bend, of Moriarty's cold smile, of the words they had exchanged, a pact forged not in friendship but in survival. Fantomas was a shadow that loomed over them both, a threat that cared nothing for their rivalry, their pride, their worlds. Holmes's mind turned to his irregulars, the street children and cabbies who moved unseen through London's underbelly, their eyes sharp where others were blind. He would need them now, their whispers a net to catch the phantom's trail. Moriarty, too, was setting his plans in motion, his study a command centre where every move was calculated, every risk weighed. He sealed a letter, its cipher, a language only his agents could read, and handed it to a silent figure who slipped into the night. His network was vast, a machine of loyalty and fear, but Fantomas was a variable he could not control. The phantom strikes were not random. They were a message, a declaration of war on the order Moriarty had built. He leaned back, his eyes narrowing, and thought of Holmes, the detective's relentless logic, his unyielding pursuit of truth. Their alliance was a chess game within a chess game, each move a test of will, each word a potential betrayal. The night stretched on, the fog a heavy blanket over the city's secrets. Holmes stepped into the street, his coat pulled tight against the damp, his mind already mapping the path ahead. He moved through Whitechapel, where the air was thick with the scent of gin and despair, the sound of a fiddle drifting from a tavern's open door. His irregulars were waiting, their faces smudged with dirt, their eyes bright with the promise of coins. He spoke in low tones, his instructions precise. Watch the docks, the stations, the places where shadows gathered. Fantomas was not in London, not yet, but his presence was a weight in the air, a ripple in the city's rhythm. Moriarty's carriage rolled through the West End, its wheels a soft whisper on the cobblestones. The air smelled of polished leather and the faint perfume of wealth, a stark contrast to the city's darker corners. His agents were already moving, their orders clear: track the phantom's trail, from the gambling dens of Paris to the back alleys of Vienna. Moriarty's mind was a machine, its gears turning through possibilities, calculating the cost of every decision. Holmes was a necessary ally, but a dangerous one, his intellect a mirror to Moriarty's own. The alliance would hold only as long as their goals aligned, and Moriarty knew the moment would come when one of them would tip the balance. The city was a chessboard, its pieces moving in the dark. Holmes's irregulars spread through London like a net, their whispers catching fragments of the phantom's trail. A stranger seen at the docks, a coded note passed in a tavern, a symbol scratched into a warehouse wall. Moriarty's agents, too, were at work, their messages flowing through hidden channels, their eyes watching the ports and railways where Fantomas might strike next. The game was vast, its stakes higher than either man had faced before, and the phantom was always one step ahead, his laughter a shadow in their thoughts. Holmes paused by the Thames, the water's surface a black mirror under the fog. The air was cold, the scent of mud and salt sharp in his lungs. He thought of Fantomas, of the mind behind the F, of the chaos that threatened to consume everything he had fought for. The detective's fingers tightened around his notebook, its pages filled with questions that had no answers, not yet. He saw the pattern, faint but growing clearer. Fantomas was not just a criminal, he was a force, a storm that fed on disruption, and London was only the beginning. Moriarty too stood by a window, the city's lights blurred by the fog, his mind a storm of its own. He saw the same pattern, the same threat, but where Holmes sought truth, Moriarty sought control. Fantomas was a rival, a mind that challenged his dominion, and Moriarty would not yield. He thought of the river bend, of Holmes's steady gaze, of the alliance that bound them like a chain. The game was moving beyond London, its threads stretching across Europe, and Moriarty would be ready. The clock struck 3, its chime a soft echo in the night. The city slept, but its shadows were awake, their movements a dance of hunter and hunted. Holmes and Moriarty, each in their own world, were drawing closer to the Phantom, their paths converging like rivers to the sea. The fog parted briefly, revealing the faint outline of a ship on the Thames, its silhouette a promise of the chase to come. The game was far from over, and Fantomas, wherever he was watching his next move already in motion. The Thames flowed on, its waters a dark ribbon threading through the heart of London, its surface catching the faint flickering light of gas lamps as the fog began to lift, revealing a city stirring in the pre-dawn chill. The air was sharp with the scent of wet stone and the faint acrid bite of coal smoke, a reminder of the factories that never slept. Sherlock Holmes moved through the streets, his coat heavy with damp, his steps a quiet rhythm against the cobblestones. The city was waking, its sounds a soft chorus. The creak of a milk cart, the low murmur of early vendors, the distant whistle of a train cutting through the mist. Across the city, Professor James Moriarty sat in his study, the air thick with the scent of old leather and the faint metallic tang of ink. His mind a labyrinth of plans and contingencies. The map before him was a battlefield, its pins and lines marking the Phantom's trail, each one a challenge to his dominion. The night had been long, but the game was far from over, and Fantomas, the shadow that bound them, was a whisper in the dark. Picture this London of 1891, a city caught in the tension between shadow and light, where every alley held a secret and every face a story. The air was heavy, laced with the musty smell of damp wool and the sharp tang of river mud, undercut by the fleeting warmth of bread baking in a nearby oven. The streets were alive with the clatter of hooves, the soft thud of boots on wet stone, the faint laughter of a barmaid closing up for the night. To touch this world was to feel its edges, the rough grain of a wooden stall, the cold slickness of a railing by the docks, the fragile warmth of a shawl against the morning chill. A bite of cheese from a street vendor would be sharp, its rind gritty with the dust of the city, a taste that lingered like the weight of survival. This was a place where dreams were tempered by hardship, where the poor scraped by in rooms that smelled of mildew, and the rich hide their fears behind locked doors, their lives a delicate balance of power and pretense. Holmes's mind was a machine, its gears turning through the fragments of Fantomas' trail. He stood by the window of his Baker Street rooms, the glass cold against his palm, the city sprawled below like a puzzle waiting to be solved. The letter with its elegant F lay on his desk, its words a taunt that echoed in his thoughts. The game is no longer yours alone. Fantomas was not just a criminal, he was a spectre, a mind that thrived on chaos, leaving behind a trail of audacious crimes that defied logic. A bank vault in Berlin, emptied without a trace. A diplomat's death in Vienna, staged with theatrical precision. A coded message in Paris, its words a riddle that led to nothing but shadows. Holmes's fingers tapped a restless rhythm, his eyes tracing the city's rooftops where the fog was beginning to thin, revealing the first pale light of dawn. The Phantom was out there, moving faster than any man should, and Holmes was determined to find the thread that tied it all together. In his study, Moriarty leaned over his map, the air heavy with the scent of wax and the faint hum of a gas lamp, casting long shadows across the room. His fingers traced the lines of his empire, a web of influence that stretched from London's docks to the salons of Europe, now fraying under the weight of Fantomas' strikes. The Phantom was a rival, a mind that challenged Moriarty's control, each act a deliberate cut at the heart of his power. A shipment of gold vanished in Lisbon, a blackmail scheme in Berlin, unravelled before it could begin, a painting stolen in Paris, replaced with a mocking sketch of that same F. Moriarty's eyes narrowed, his mind calculating the cost of every move, the delicate balance of his alliance with Holmes. The detective was a tool, a necessary piece in this game, but one that could turn against him if the scales tipped too far. What must it have been like to walk these streets, where every step felt like a gamble, where the air itself seemed to carry the weight of unseen eyes? The city was a chessboard, its pieces moving in the half-light, and Holmes and Moriarty were players bound by a single, inescapable truth. Fantomas was rewriting the rules. Their alliance was a fragile thing, a bridge built on necessity, each man watching the other for the first sign of weakness. Holmes's irregulars were already at work, their small, quick figures slipping through the city's underbelly, their eyes catching the glint of secrets in the dark. Moriarty's agents, too, were moving, their messages coded in languages only they could read, their paths hidden in the shadows of taverns and back alleys. Holmes stepped into the street, the air cold against his face, the scent of wet stone and horse dung sharp in his lungs. He moved toward the docks, where the Thames was a living thing, its waters carrying the weight of the city's secrets. His irregulars had brought him whispers. A stranger seen near a warehouse, his face hidden by a scarf, a symbol scratched into a crate, its curves matching the F on the letter. A coded note passed in a tavern, its words too fragmented to decipher. Holmes's mind sifted through the clues, discarding the irrelevant, piecing together a pattern that was still too faint to grasp. Fantomas was not in London, not yet, but his presence was a shadow that stretched across the city, a promise of chaos to come. Moriarty, too, was on the move, his carriage cutting through the early morning fog, its wheels a soft whisper on the cobblestones. The air smelled of polished leather and the faint perfume of wealth, a stark contrast to the city's darker corners. He had received word from his agents, a sighting in Paris, a masked figure slipping through the catacombs, a rumour in Vienna of a man who spoke in riddles and vanished like smoke. Moriarty's mind was a storm of calculations, weighing the cost of every decision, the risk of trusting Holmes. The detective's logic was a blade, sharp and unrelenting. But Moriarty saw the game differently, not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a war to be won. Fantomas was a threat to his empire, a rival who played for chaos, and Moriarty would not let him prevail. The city was waking, its streets filling with the clatter of carts and the shouts of vendors, but the fog still lingered, a reminder of the secrets it hid. Holmes stood by a dockside warehouse, its walls damp with dew, the air heavy with the scent of tar and salt. He examined the symbol scratched into a crate, its curves precise, deliberate, a mark that spoke of Fantomas' arrogance. The detective's fingers traced the lines, his mind racing through possibilities. A signal, a taunt, a piece of the puzzle. He spoke to a boy, one of his irregulars, whose eyes were bright with the thrill of the chase. The boy's words were quick, breathless, telling of a ship that had docked under cover of night, its cargo unmarked, its crew silent. Holmes nodded, his thoughts already turning to the next move, the next city, the next thread in the Phantom's web. Moriarty's carriage stopped near a quiet street in the West End, where the air was softer, scented with the faint sweetness of blooming jasmine. He stepped out, his movements precise, and met an agent whose face was half hidden by a hat. The man's words were low, urgent, speaking of a lead in Berlin, a coded message intercepted, its words hinting at a plan too vast to grasp. Moriarty's smile was thin, his mind already mapping the path ahead. He handed the agent a new set of instructions, written in a cipher that changed with every message, and sent him back into the shadows. The game was moving beyond London, its stakes rising with every step, and Moriarty was ready to play. The dawn was breaking, the fog lifting to reveal a city bathed in pale light, its rooftops sharp against the sky. Holmes and Moriarty, separated by miles but bound by purpose, were drawing closer to Fantomas, their paths converging like rivers to the sea. The detective's mind was a map, its lines connecting clues across continents, each one a step toward the phantom. Moriarty's thoughts were a web, its threads stretching through the shadows, each one a move to reclaim control. The city watched, its streets a stage for their uneasy alliance, its air thick with the promise of what was to come. The Thames flowed on, its waters carrying the weight of their plans, their fears, their resolve. Holmes stood by the docks, his eyes fixed on the horizon, where a ship was fading into the mist. Moriarty returned to his study, the map before him a testament to the game they played. Fantomas was out there, a shadow moving faster than they could follow, his laughter a whisper in the wind. The clock struck 4, its chime a soft echo in the morning light, and the chase, vast and perilous, was only just beginning. Holmes's mind was a compass, its needle spinning through the clues that Fantomas had scattered like ashes. The ferry's motion was a steady rhythm, each wave sharpening his focus. The Fonnoletta, its curves a silent taunt, was a thread that ran through every crime, a symbol carved into a crate in London, whispered in a Paris cafe, scratched into a bag at Dover. Fantomas was not just a thief or a killer. He was a weaver of chaos, his crimes a tapestry meant to unravel the world's order. A bank vault in Berlin, emptied with a magician's sleight. A diplomat's death in Vienna, staged with a poet's flair. A coded note in Lisbon, its words a labyrinth that led to shadows. Holmes's fingers brushed the notebook in his pocket, its pages a mosaic of fragments, sketches of symbols, lists of cities, rumours of a phantom who danced just out of reach. The ferry was carrying him toward Calais, toward Paris, where the catacombs waited like a stage set for Fantomas' next act. The world was a stage, its cities alive with the drama of the chase. Holmes's irregulars moved through London's markets and alleys, their whispers catching glimpses of the phantom's trail. A sighting in a tavern, a mark on a wall, a rumour of a ship bound for Calais. Moriarty's agents were equally relentless, their messages flowing through hidden channels, their eyes watching the ports and stations where Fantomas might strike. The alliance between Holmes and Moriarty was a delicate dance, each step a test of trust, each glance a measure of intent. The sun was high now, its light revealing the world's edges, the sharp cliffs of Dover, the soft curve of the Channel's horizon, the fleeting shadows of those who moved unseen. Holmes stepped onto the dock at Calais, the air thick with the scent of fish and tar, the sound of French voices blending with the creak of ropes and the splash of waves. He moved through the port, his eyes scanning the crowd for a face that didn't belong, a clue that might lead to Fantomas. A boy approached, his cap pulled low, his words quick and hushed, speaking of a man seen boarding a train to Paris, his bag heavy with papers, his scarf pulled high. Holmes's mind raced, connecting the dots. The ferry, the stranger, the catacombs waiting in Paris. He boarded the train, the carriage rattling toward the city, the air alive with the promise of the chase. Moriarty, too, was planning his study in a fortress where every move was calculated, every risk weighted. He stood by the window, the city's spires sharp against the sky, his thoughts a web of strategies and secrets. He saw the game, its stakes rising with every move, and he knew Fantomas was watching, his laughter a whisper in the shadows. The clock struck 9, its chime a soft echo in the day's warmth, and the chase stretched out before them, its path winding through the heart of a continent on the edge. The sea flowed on, its waves carrying the weight of their resolve, their fears, their secrets. Holmes and Moriarty, separated by distance but bound by purpose, were drawing closer to Fantomas, their paths converging like threads in a tapestry yet to be woven, the world holding its breath for the reckoning to come. The sun had dipped low over Paris, its amber light spilling across the Seine, weaving golden threads through the river's restless flow. The air was rich with the scent of river silt and the faint sweetness of chestnut blossoms, laced with the distant tang of chimney smoke. Sherlock Holmes stood on a shadowed street near the Ile de la Cité, his coat dusted with the grit of a journey across continents, his eyes scanning the crowd for a trace of the phantom they had pursued through cities and secrets. The city hummed with life, the clatter of carriage wheels on cobbled lanes, the soft laughter from a nearby cafe, the distant chime of Notre Dame's bells threading through the evening's warmth. Across the channel, in the cloistered hush of his London study, Professor James Moriarty sat at a desk strewn with ciphers and maps, the air heavy with the scent of aged parchment and the faint glow of a lamp casting shadows across his empire's fragile lines. Each pin on his map was a wound, a mark of Fantomas' chaos, the final note in a game that had bound two rivals in a delicate, desperate dance. The world held its breath, the chase converging on this city of light and shadow, where the phantom's laughter lingered like a whisper on the breeze. The dawn had broken over London, its pale light filtering through the thinning fog, casting long shadows across the cobblestones. The Thames stirred, its waters catching the first rays like scattered coins, the air heavy with the scent of river mud and the faint bitter tang of coal smoke from distant chimneys. Sherlock Holmes stood by the docks, his coat still damp from the night's mist, his eyes scanning the horizon where a ship had vanished into the haze. The city was waking, its pulse quickening with the clatter of carts and the low hum of voices, but the weight of the chase lingered, a quiet tension that clung to the morning. Across the city, in the shadowed sanctuary of his study, Professor James Moriarty sat at his desk, the air thick with the scent of old books and the sharp bite of ink. His map of Europe lay before him, its pins glinting in the light of a single lamp, each one a marker in the game that now stretched beyond London's borders. Fantomas, the phantom who bound them, was a shadow moving through the dawn, his presence a whisper that neither man could ignore. Imagine this London of 1891, a city caught in the delicate balance between day and night, where the air was a tapestry of scents, the damp earthiness of the river, the fleeting warmth of bread from a baker's oven, the acrid edge of smoke from a street vendor's fire. The sounds were a soft symphony, the creak of a barge's ropes, the muffled shout of a dock worker, the distant toll of a church bell marking the hour. To touch this world was to feel its texture, the slick stone of a key under your fingers, the rough weave of a sack left by the docks, the cold metal of a lamppost still wet with dew. A sip of coffee from a street stall would be bitter, its warmth a fleeting comfort against the morning chill, its taste laced with the grit of a city that never truly slept. This was a place where survival was a daily act of defiance, where the poor stitched their lives together with threadbare hope and the rich guarded their secrets behind iron gates, where every step was a dance with danger. Holmes's mind was a furnace, its flames fueled by the fragments of Fantomas' trail. He moved through the docks, his boots silent on the damp wood, his thoughts tracing the clues his irregulars had gathered. A symbol scratched into a crate, its curves matching the F on the letter. A whispered sighting of a masked figure near a warehouse. A coded note passed in a tavern, its words a riddle that dissolved into nothing. The detective's eyes narrowed as he examined a mark on a piling, its lines deliberate, a taunt left for those who dared to follow. Fantomas was not just a criminal, he was a performer, his crimes a stage where chaos played the lead. Holmes's fingers brushed the rough wood, his mind sifting through the evidence, seeking the thread that would tie Berlin to Lisbon, Paris to Vienna, London to the unknown. The phantom was moving, always one step ahead, and Holmes felt the weight of a game that was no longer his to control. In his study, Moriarty leaned back, the air heavy with the scent of wax and the faint hum of a gas lamp casting shadows across his map. His fingers traced the lines of his empire, a network of power now fraying under Fantomas' touch. The phantom's strikes were surgical, each one a blow to Moriarty's control. A bank in Berlin, its vault emptied in a single night, a diplomat in Vienna, silenced with a precision that mocked Moriarty's own methods, A shipment in Lisbon vanished into the hands of an unseen enemy. The F was a signature, a brand that burned in his thoughts, a challenge to the order he had built. Moriarty sipped his brandy, its sharp warmth a contrast to the cold calculation in his eyes, and his mind turned to Holmes. The detective's relentless logic, his unyielding pursuit of truth. Their alliance was a tightrope, each step a test of balance, and Moriarty knew the moment would come when one of them would fall. The city was a living thing, its streets a maze where secrets were traded like coins. The morning light was soft, but it carried a weight, illuminating the grit and grime of a world that thrived on struggle. Holmes moved through the docks, his irregulars trailing like shadows, their small forms slipping through the crowds with ease. A boy approached, his cap pulled low, his voice a whisper, as he spoke of a ship bound for Calais, its cargo unmarked, its crew too quiet for honest men. Holmes nodded, his mind already mapping the route across the channel where Fantomas's trail might lead. The detective's fingers tightened around his notebook, its pages filled with sketches and notes, each one a piece of the puzzle that refused to cohere. He saw the pattern, faint but growing clearer. Fantomas was not just a thief or a killer, he was a disruptor, a force that fed on the unravelling of empires, and London was only the opening act. Moriarty too was moving, his carriage rolling through the West End where the air was softer, scented with the faint sweetness of blooming flowers and the polish of wealth. He met an agent in a quiet alley, the man's face half hidden by the brim of his hat, his words low and urgent. A lid in Paris, a masked figure seen in the catacombs, slipping through the shadows like a ghost. A rumour in Berlin, a coded message hinting at a plan too vast to grasp, its words cloaked in riddles. Moriarty's smile was thin, his mind a storm of calculations, weighing the cost of every move, the risk of trusting Holmes. The detective was a necessary ally, but a dangerous one, his intellect a mirror to Moriarty's own. The game was shifting, its stakes rising with every step, and Moriarty was determined to stay ahead. The morning deepened, the city's pulse quickening as the streets filled with the clatter of carts and the shouts of vendors. Holmes stood by the Thames, the water's surface a mirror for the pale sky, its air thick with the scent of tar and salt. He thought of Fantomas, of the mind behind the F, of the chaos that threatened to consume everything he had fought for. The detective's eyes scanned the horizon, where the ship to Calais had vanished, its trail a thread in the web that stretched across Europe. He spoke to another irregular, a girl with sharp eyes and a quick tongue, who told of a stranger at the station, his bag heavy with papers, his face hidden by a scarf. Holmes's mind raced, connecting the dots, the ship, the stranger, the symbol on the crate. Fantomas was moving, and the channel was the next step. Moriarty's carriage stopped near a quiet square, the air scented with the faint perfume of wealth and the soft rustle of leaves. He met another agent, a woman whose eyes were cold, her words precise. She spoke of Vienna, of a meeting in a shadowed cafe where a man with no name had left a note, its F a silent taunt. Moriarty's fingers twitched, his mind mapping the path ahead, calculating the moves that would keep his empire intact. He handed her a new set of instructions, written in a cipher that changed with every message, and sent her back into the shadows. The game was vast, its pieces scattered across continents, and Moriarty would not let Fantomas win. The city was a chessboard, its streets a stage for the chase that was unfolding. Holmes's irregulars moved through the docks and stations, their whispers catching the Phantom's trail. A sighting here, a symbol there, a coded note that vanished before it could be read. Moriarty's agents too were at work, their messages flowing through hidden channels, their eyes watching the ports and railways where Fantomas might strike next. The alliance between Holmes and Moriarty was a delicate thing, a pact forged in the shadow of a greater threat, each man playing his part while watching the other for the first sign of betrayal. The sun climbed higher, its light cutting through the last of the fog, revealing a city sharp and unyielding. Holmes stood by the docks, his eyes fixed on the water, his mind a map of Europe, its lines converging on Calais, Paris, Vienna. He saw the game, its stakes higher than he had ever faced, and he knew the Phantom was watching, waiting, his next move already in motion. Moriarty too stood in his study, the map before him a testament to the war they fought, his thoughts a web of plans and contingencies. The clock struck 5, its chime a soft echo in the morning light, and the chase, vast and perilous, stretched out before them, its end hidden in the shadows of a continent on the brink. The morning had settled over London like a soft exhale, its light spilling across the rooftops, turning the last wisps of fog into threads of gold. The Thames was a quiet companion, its waters glinting under the rising sun, carrying the faint scent of briny salt and the earthy tang of silt stirred by passing barges. Sherlock Holmes stood at the edge of a bustling railway station, the air thick with the sharp bite of steam and the low hum of a crowd in motion. His coat, still heavy with the night's damp, clung to his frame as he watched the train to Dover pull away, its whistle a piercing note that cut through the morning's clamour. Across the city, in a study cloaked in the hush of wealth, Professor James Moriarty stood before a tall window, the air scented with the faint musk of old vellum and the sharp edge of sealing wax. His map of Europe, pinned with markers of his empire, glowed in the soft light of a chandelier, each pin a silent challenge from the phantom they both pursued. Fantomas, whose shadow stretched across the continent, a riddle wrapped in chaos. Imagine this London of 1891, a city poised on the edge of day, its streets alive with the raw pulse of life. The air was a mosaic of scents. The warm, yeasty aroma of fresh loaves carried from a bakery's open door, the sour sting of sweat from labourers hauling crates, the fleeting sweetness of violets sold by a flower girl on a corner. The sounds wove a delicate tapestry, the rhythmic clop of horses pulling a hansom cab, the soft rustle of skirts brushing the pavement, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer shaping iron. To touch this world was to feel its contradictions. The smooth polish of a brass doorknob in a wealthy square, the jagged edge of a broken cobblestone in an alley, the fragile warmth of a woolen glove against the morning's chill. A sip of porter from a street vendor's jug would be rich and bitter, its foam flecked with the dust of the city, a taste that lingered like the weight of 1,000 unseen stories. This was a place where every moment was a balance, where the poor wove their lives from scraps of resilience, and the rich cloaked their fears in silk, where danger and beauty walked hand in hand. Holmes's mind was a kaleidoscope, each turn revealing a new facet of Fantomas's game. He stood on the platform, the air heavy with the scent of coal and oil, his eyes catching every detail. The hurried step of a porter, the nervous glance of a traveller, the faint smudge of ink on a discarded ticket. The clues his irregulars had gathered were fragments of a larger truth, a symbol carved into a dockside crate, its F a bold flourish, a whispered tale of a stranger at the docks, his cloak hiding a face no one could recall, a scrap of paper found in a tavern, its coded words a labyrinth that led nowhere. Fantomas was not merely a criminal. He was a maestro, conducting a symphony of disorder across Europe's cities. Holmes's fingers brushed the notebook in his pocket, its pages a map of questions, each one a step toward the phantom shadow. The train to Dover was gone, but its destination, Calais, and beyond it, Paris, was a beacon, pulling him toward the heart of the chase. In his study, Moriarty stood before his map, the air thick with the scent of polished wood and the faint glow of a fire in the hearth. His empire was a delicate machine, its gears turning from London's shadowed alleys to the glittering courts of Vienna, but Fantomas was a wrench in its workings. The phantom's strikes were precise, each one a wound to Moriarty's control. A vault in Berlin, its contents vanished under cover of night, a financier in Lisbon, silenced before he could betray a secret, a coded letter in Paris, its words a taunt that mocked Moriarty's own ciphers. The F was a signature, a challenge to his dominion, a rival who played not for power, but for the thrill of unravelling it. Moriarty's fingers tightened around a glass of claret, its deep red catching the light, and his thoughts turned to Holmes, the detective's piercing intellect, his relentless drive to solve the unsolvable. Their alliance was a chessboard, each move a gamble, each word a potential checkmate. What must it have been like to stand in a city where every glance could hide a motive, where the morning light revealed as much as it concealed? The streets of London were a tapestry of secrets, its threads woven from whispers and shadows, its patterns shifting with every step. Holmes and Moriarty, two architects of order in their own domains, were now bound by a phantom who thrived on chaos. Their alliance was a fragile bridge, built on necessity and strained by suspicion, each man measuring the other's moves with the precision of a duelist. Holmes's irregulars were a network of eyes and ears, their small forms slipping through the city's cracks, catching glimpses of Fantomas' trail. Moriarty's agents, too, were moving, their loyalty bound by fear and coin, their messages a web of ciphers that spanned the continent. Holmes moved through the station, the air alive with the hiss of steam and the murmur of voices. He met a girl, one of his irregulars, her eyes sharp beneath a tattered bonnet, her words quick and hushed. She spoke of a man seen at the docks, his bag heavy with papers, his scarf pulled high to hide his face. The bag bore a faint mark, an F scratched into its leather, a clue that sent Holmes's mind racing. He saw the pattern, its edges clearer now. Fantomas was not hiding. He was performing, leaving breadcrumbs to lure his pursuers into a trap of his own design. The detective's thoughts turned to Paris, where the catacombs were a labyrinth of shadows, a stage for the phantom's next act. He boarded a train, his silhouette a dark line against the platform's bustle, his mind already crossing the channel, mapping the streets of a city where Fantomas waited. Moriarty too was in motion, his carriage gliding through the quiet elegance of Mayfair, where the air was scented with the faint perfume of wealth and the soft rustle of silk curtains. He met an agent in a discreet courtyard, the man's eyes cold, his voice a low murmur. A lead in Vienna, a stranger in a cafe, his words cloaked in riddles, his departure marked by a note with that familiar F. Moriarty's mind was a storm, calculating the angles of the game, weighing the cost of every move. Holmes was a necessary ally, his logic a tool to be wielded, but Moriarty saw the endgame differently, not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a war to be won. He handed the agent a sealed envelope, its cipher a language of shadows, and sent him into the morning light. The game was moving, its pieces scattered across Europe, and Moriarty would not let Fantomas claim the board. The city was a stage, its streets alive with the drama of the chase. Holmes's irregulars moved through the markets and alleys, their whispers catching fragments of the phantom's trail. A sighting in a tavern, a mark on a wall, a rumour of a ship bound for Calais. Moriarty's agents were equally relentless, their messages flowing through hidden channels, their eyes watching the ports and railways where Fantomas might strike. The alliance between Holmes and Moriarty was a delicate dance, each step a test of trust, each glance a measure of intent. The morning was bright now, its light revealing the city's edges, the sharp lines of rooftops, the soft curve of the river, the fleeting shadows of those who moved unseen. Holmes sat in the train, the carriage rattling toward Dover, the air heavy with the scent of coal and the faint tang of salt from the approaching sea. His mind was a map, its lines converging on Paris, where the catacombs waited, their darkness a canvas for Fantomas' chaos. He saw the game, its stakes rising with every mile, and he knew the phantom was watching, his laughter a whisper in the shadows. Moriarty too was planning his study in a fortress where every move was calculated, every risk weighted. He stood by the window, the city's spires sharp against the sky, his thoughts a web of strategies and secrets. The clock struck 7, its chime a soft echo in the morning light, and the chase stretched out before them, its path winding through the heart of a continent on the edge. The Thames flowed on, its waters carrying the weight of their resolve, their fears, their secrets. Holmes and Moriarty, separated by distance but bound by purpose, were drawing closer to Fantomas, their paths converging like rivers to the sea. The city watched, its streets a stage for their uneasy alliance, its air thick with the promise of a reckoning yet to come. The morning had ripened into a golden haze, the sun climbing higher over London, its light softening the city's sharp edges. The Thames flowed with a quiet insistence, its waters glinting like polished slate, carrying the faint scent of briny tide and the soft musk of silt churned by passing boats. Sherlock Holmes sat in a train carriage rattling toward Dover, the air thick with the acrid tang of coal smoke and the faint oily scent of the engine. The world outside the window blurred past, fields and hedgerows emerging from the mist, their greens muted by the city's lingering breath. Across the continent, in a shadowed study in London's heart, Professor James Moriarty stood before a tall window, the air heavy with the scent of polished mahogany and the sharp bite of fresh ink. His map of Europe was a constellation of pins, each one a silent taunt from Fantomas, the phantom whose shadow stretched across their worlds, binding them in a chase that felt like a dream teetering on the edge of a nightmare. Picture this world of 1891, a tapestry woven from struggle and splendour, where every city was a stage for secrets. In London, the air was a blend of scents, the warm, doughy aroma of bread cooling on a baker's rack, the sour sting of sweat from labourers hauling barrels, the fleeting sweetness of a flower girl's violets wilting in the heat. The sounds were a delicate chorus, the rhythmic clop of a horse's hooves, the soft murmur of a crowd at a market stall, the distant peal of a church bell slicing through the morning's hum. To touch this world was to feel its pulse, the smooth polish of a brass doorknob in a wealthy square, the jagged edge of a broken cobblestone in an alley, the fragile warmth of a cotton scarf against the breeze. A sip of tea from a station vendor would be bitter, its leaves steeped too long, its taste laced with the faint grit of coal dust carried on the wind. This was a place where every moment was a negotiation, where the poor stitched their lives with scraps of resilience and the rich cloaked their fears in velvet, where danger danced in the shadows of every street. Holmes's mind was a labyrinth, its paths twisting through the clues that Fantomas had left like breadcrumbs in a fairy tale gone dark. The train's rhythm was a metronome to his thoughts, each jolt sharpening his focus. The if on the letter, its curves elegant yet menacing, was a signature that haunted him, a mark found on a crate by the docks, whispered in a tavern's shadows, scratched into a stranger's bag at the station. Fantomas was not just a criminal. He was a conjurer, his crimes a performance meant to dazzle and deceive. A theft in Berlin, executed with the precision of a surgeon, a murder in Vienna staged with the flair of a playwright, a coded note in Paris, its words a riddle that dissolved into mist. Holmes's fingers brushed the notebook in his pocket, its pages a canvas of fragments, sketches of symbols, lists of cities, whispers of a phantom who moved faster than any man should. The train was carrying him toward Calais, toward Paris, where the catacombs waited like a labyrinth designed for chaos. In his study, Moriarty stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the map, the air thick with the scent of wax and the faint glow of a fire casting shadows across the room. His empire was a delicate web, its threads spun from London's underbelly to the glittering courts of Europe, but Fantomas was a spider cutting through its strands. The phantom strikes were a symphony of disruption. A bank vault in Berlin, emptied in a single night. A financier in Lisbon, silenced with a precision that mirrored Moriarty's own methods. A shipment of arms in Vienna vanished into hands unknown. The F was a taunt, a challenge to his dominion, a rival who played for the thrill of unravelling order. Moriarty's fingers tightened around a pen, its nib hovering over a ciphered message, his thoughts turning to Holmes, the detective's piercing logic, his unyielding pursuit of truth. Their alliance was a tightrope stretched over a chasm, each step a test of balance, each word a potential misstep. The world beyond London was waking, its cities stirring under the same sun that bathed the Thames. Holmes's train crossed the countryside, the air growing sharper with the scent of salt as it neared Dover's cliffs. He leaned against the window, the glass cool against his cheek, and let his mind trace the Phantom's trail. His irregulars had sent word before he boarded. A stranger seen at the docks, his cloak hiding a face no one could recall. A symbol etched into a railway timetable, its F a silent taunt. A rumour of a ship bound for Calais, its cargo shrouded in secrecy. Holmes saw the pattern, its edges sharper now. Fantomas was not hiding. He was leading, drawing his pursuers into a game of his own design. The detective's thoughts turned to Paris, where the catacombs were a maze of shadows, their darkness a stage for the Phantom's next act. He closed his eyes, the train's rhythm a pulse in his veins, and saw the city's streets, narrow, cobbled, scented with wine and dust, alive with the whispers of 1,000 secrets. Moriarty, too, was planning his study as a fortress of thought, where every move was weighed, every risk calculated. He stepped away from the map, the air heavy with the scent of polished wood and the faint crackle of the fire. His agents had brought news, a sighting in Vienna, a masked figure slipping through a cafe's shadows, a coded message in Berlin, its words hinting at a plan too vast to grasp, a rumour in Paris of a stranger who spoke in riddles and vanished like smoke. Moriarty's mind was a storm, its current swirling through possibilities, calculating the cost of trusting Holmes. The detective was a necessary ally, his intellect a blade to be wielded, but Moriarty saw the game differently, not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a battlefield to be claimed. He sealed a letter, its cipher a language of shadows, and handed it to an agent who melted into the morning's light. The game was moving, its pieces scattered across Europe, and Moriarty would not let Fantomas hold the advantage. The world was a chessboard, its cities linked by railways and rivers, its shadows alive with the chase. Holmes's irregulars were a network of whispers, their small forms slipping through London's markets and alleys, catching glimpses of Fantomas' trail. A mark on a wall, a rumour in a tavern, a stranger's bag heavy with secrets. Moriarty's agents were equally relentless, their messages flowing through hidden channels, their eyes watching the ports and stations where the Phantom might strike. The alliance between Holmes and Moriarty was a delicate dance, each step a test of trust, each glance a measure of intent. The sun was high now, its light revealing the world's edges, the sharp spires of London, the soft curve of the Channel's horizon, the fleeting shadows of those who moved unseen. Holmes stepped off the train at Dover, the air sharp with the scent of sea salt and the cry of gulls overhead. The port was a chaos of motion, sailors hauling ropes, passengers boarding ferries, the low hum of voices blending with the creak of wood and the splash of waves. He moved toward the dock, his eyes scanning the crowd for a face that didn't belong, a clue that might lead to Fantomas. A boy approached, one of his irregulars who had followed the trail to Dover, his voice low and urgent. He spoke of a man seen boarding a ferry, his bag marked with an F, his movements too deliberate for a casual traveller. Holmes's mind raced, connecting the dots. The ship to Calais, the stranger at the station, the catacombs waiting in Paris. He boarded the ferry, the deck slick under his boots, the air alive with the promise of the chase. Moriarty, too, was in motion, his carriage rolling through London's quieter streets, where the air was scented with the faint sweetness of blooming linden trees. He met an agent in a shadowed park, the woman's eyes sharp, her words precise. She spoke of a lead in Paris, a stranger seen near the Seine, his cloak hiding a face no one could recall. A note found in a café, its F a silent taunt. Moriarty's smile was thin, his thoughts a web of strategies and secrets. He handed her a new set of instructions, written in a cipher that shifted like the wind and sent her back into the day's light. The game was vast, its stakes rising with every move, and Moriarty was determined to stay one step ahead. The clock struck 8, its chime a distant echo in the morning's warmth, and the chase stretched out before them, its path winding through the heart of a continent on the edge. The Thames flowed on, its waters carrying the weight of their resolve, their fears, their secrets. Holmes and Moriarty, separated by seas but bound by purpose, were drawing closer to Fantomas, their paths converging like threads in a tapestry yet to be woven. The world watched, its cities a stage for their uneasy alliance, its air thick with the promise of a reckoning drawing near. The sun hung high over the English Channel, its light scattering across the waves like shards of glass. The air sharp with the briny tang of sea salt and the faint creak of a ferry's timbers. Sherlock Holmes stood on the deck, his coat billowing in the wind, his eyes fixed on the horizon where Calais waited, its shores a faint smudge against the sky. The sea was a restless thing, its rhythm a low pulse beneath the cry of gulls and the soft hum of the ship's engine. Across the continent, in the cloistered hush of his London study, Professor James Moriarty sat at a desk strewn with papers, the air thick with the scent of aged vellum and the soft glow of a chandelier casting shadows across his map of Europe. Each pin gleamed like a warning, marking the trail of Fantomas, the phantom whose chaos bound them in a game that felt like a dream slipping toward a storm. Picture this world of 1891, a tapestry stretched taut between order and upheaval, where every port and city whispered secrets. The air on the Channel was alive with the scent of salt and tar, mingled with the faint, sour bite of coal smoke drifting from the ferry's funnel. The sounds were a delicate weave, the slap of waves against the hull, the low murmur of passengers huddled against the wind, the distant toll of a buoy swaying in the tide. To touch this world was to feel its edges, the smooth, salt-crusted railing under your fingers, the rough weave of a sailor's coat brushing past, the cold sting of spray on your skin. A sip of water from a canteen would be flat, tinged with the metallic taste of the ship's pipes, of a reminder of the journey's weight. This was a place where every moment was a balance, where sailors mended nets with calloused hands, and travellers guarded their secrets with tight lips, where the sea itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next move. In his study, Moriarty leaned over his map, the air heavy with the scent of wax and the faint crackle of a fire in the hearth. His empire was a delicate construct, its threads spun from the shadows of London to the gilded halls of Vienna, but Fantomas was a flame burning through its strands. The phantom strikes were a dance of disruption. A shipment of gold vanished in Lisbon, its trail lost in the fog, a financier silenced in Berlin, his secrets buried with him, a coded message in Paris, its words a riddle that mocked Moriarty's own ciphers. The F was a challenge, a rival who played for the thrill of chaos, and Moriarty's eyes narrowed as he traced the map's lines. He sipped a glass of claret, its deep warmth a fleeting anchor, and his thoughts turned to Holmes, the detective's relentless logic, his unyielding pursuit of truth. Their alliance was a chessboard stretched across a void, each move a test of strategy, each word a potential gambit. What must it have felt like to sail toward an unknown shore where every wave could carry a clue or a trap? The world of 1891 was a mosaic of shadows, its cities linked by railways and rivers, its secrets traded in whispers. Holmes and Moriarty, two architects of their own domains, were now bound by a phantom who laughed at their control. Their alliance was a fragile thread, woven from necessity and strained by suspicion, each man watching the other for the first sign of betrayal. Holmes's irregulars were still at work in London, their whispers catching fragments of Fantomas's trail. A rumour of a masked figure at the docks, a symbol etched into a railway timetable, a stranger's bag heavy with secrets. Moriarty's agents too were moving, their messages flowing through hidden channels, their eyes watching the ports and cafes where the phantom might strike. Holmes leaned against the ferry's railing, the sea's spray cold against his face, his mind tracing the path to Paris. His irregulars had sent word before he left Dover. A man seen boarding a ship, his bag marked with an F, his movements too precise for a casual traveller. The detective's thoughts turned to the catacombs, their darkness a labyrinth where Fantomas could hide, their shadows a canvas for his chaos. He saw the pattern, its edges sharper now. The phantom was not running, he was luring, drawing his pursuers into a game where the rules were his alone. Holmes's fingers tightened around his notebook, its pages a map of questions, each one a step toward the truth. The ferry's horns sounded, a low moan that echoed across the waves, and Calais loomed closer, its docks a gateway to the chase. Moriarty too was in motion, his carriage rolling through London's quieter streets, where the air was scented with the faint sweetness of blooming jasmine and the polish of wealth. He met an agent in a shadowed alcove, the woman's eyes sharp, her voice a whisper. She spoke of a lead in Paris, a stranger seen near the Seine, his cloak hiding a face no one could recall, a note found in a cafe, its F a silent taunt. Moriarty's mind was a storm, calculating the angles of the game, weighing the cost of trusting Holmes. The detective was a necessary ally, his intellect a tool to be wielded, but Moriarty saw the endgame differently, not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a throne to be claimed. He handed the agent a sealed envelope, its cipher a language of shadows, and sent her into the day's light. The game was vast, its pieces scattered across Europe, and Moriarty would not let Fantomas hold the board. Enter this Paris of 1891, a city where elegance and intrigue intertwined like vines in a forgotten garden. The air was a mosaic of scents, the warm, buttery aroma of fresh baguettes cooling on a baker's rack, the sharp bite of spilled wine in a narrow alley, the fleeting trace of lavender from a passing lady's shawl. The sounds were a gentle chorus, the creak of a boat's oars on the Seine, the soft hum of a street performer's violin, the faint rustle of leaves stirred by the evening wind. To touch this world was to feel its pulse, the smooth stone of a bridge's arch under your fingers, the rough weave of a beggar's cloak brushing past, the cool iron of a cafe's chair warmed by the day's sun. A sip of absinthe from a dimly lit bar would burn the throat, its anise bite laced with the dust of a city that thrived on contradiction. This was a place where every moment was a balance, where poets wove dreams in attic rooms and thieves spun their schemes in the shadows, where beauty and danger were inseparable companions. Holmes's mind was a blade, honed by the chase, its edge slicing through the haze of Fantomas's riddles. He moved through the streets, his steps silent on the worn cobbles, his eyes catching every detail. The flicker of a curtain in a high window, the hurried glance of a vendor closing his stall, the faint smudge of ink on a discarded newspaper. The clues had drawn him here to Paris, where the catacombs lay beneath the city like a secret carved in stone. His irregulars had sent word across the channel. A stranger seen near the Seine, his face hidden by a scarf. A cryptic spiral etched into a cafe's wooden table, its lines a bold challenge. A coded note tucked into a bookseller's stall, its words a maze pointing to the city's depths. Fantomas was not merely a criminal. He was a conductor, orchestrating a symphony of disorder across Europe's capitals. Holmes's fingers brushed the notebook in his pocket, its pages a canvas of fragments, sketches of patterns, lists of crimes, whispers of a phantom who danced just beyond reach. The catacombs were near, their darkness a canvas for the final act. In his London study, Moriarty stood before his map, the air thick with the scent of sealing wax and the soft crackle of a fire in the hearth. His empire was a fragile web, its threads fraying under Fantomas' relentless strikes. A vault in Berlin, emptied with a conjurer's finesse. A diplomat in Vienna, silenced with a dramatist's touch. A shipment of gold in Lisbon, vanished into an unseen foe's hands. The phantom's mark was a wound, a rival who played for chaos while Moriarty played for dominion. He sipped his claret, its deep warmth a fleeting anchor, and his thoughts turned to Holmes, the detective's unyielding logic, his relentless pursuit of truth. Their alliance was a tightrope stretched across a chasm, each step a test of balance, each silence a potential betrayal. Moriarty's agents had brought news from Paris, a sighting in a dimly lit cafe, a note left at a catacomb's entrance, its spiral a taunt to his control. He sealed a final message, its cipher a language of shadows, and sent it across the sea, his mind already mapping the endgame. What must it have been like to stand in a city where every shadow could conceal a trap, where the evening air carried the weight of secrets? The streets of Paris were a labyrinth, their paths winding through hope and treachery, their corners hiding truths that could unravel empires. Holmes and Moriarty, two architects of order in their own realms, were bound by a phantom who thrived on disruption. Their alliance was a fragile thread, woven from necessity and strained by suspicion, each man watching the other for the first sign of weakness. Holmes's irregulars moved through Paris like whispers, their eyes sharp in the twilight, catching glimpses of Fantomas' trail. A rumour in a tavern, a spiral on a wall, a stranger's bag heavy with secrets. Moriarty's agents were equally relentless, their messages flowing through hidden channels, their loyalty bound by fear and coin. Holmes descended into the catacombs, the air cold and heavy with the scent of damp earth and the faint chalky tang of ancient bone. His lantern cast a trembling glow, its light catching a faint glint of metal, a discarded coin, its edge etched with a delicate pattern, a clue left by Fantomas' hand. The tunnels were a maze, their walls lined with the silent gaze of skulls, their silence broken only by the drip of water and the echo of his steps. Fantomas was close, his presence a weight in the dark, his laughter a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Holmes's heart quickened, his mind narrowing to a single point, his fingers gripping the notebook that held the chase's map. He moved deeper, the air growing colder, the shadows thicker, the coin's pattern a guide to the phantom's lair. Moriarty's agent reached Paris, the city's lights twinkling like stars against the dusk. The woman's eyes were sharp, her steps silent as she entered the catacombs, her lantern a dim beacon in the dark. She carried Moriarty's instructions, a plan to corner Fantomas, to force him into the light where he could not escape. The air was thick with the scent of mould and the faint echo of dripping water, the walls closing in like a trap. She saw the glint of the coin, its pattern a subtle challenge, and her pulse raced, her mind focused on the task. Holmes was here, somewhere in the dark, and the alliance held, fragile but unbroken, their paths converging on the phantom who had haunted them across continents. The catacombs were a labyrinth, their darkness a canvas for Fantomas' chaos. Holmes moved through the tunnels, his lantern's light dancing across the walls, catching the glint of another coin, its pattern matching the first. A sound, a soft scrape. A whisper of movement broke the silence, and his heart steadied, his mind sharpening. Fantomas was near, his presence a shadow that seemed to shift with every step. Moriarty's agent followed, her lantern raised, her eyes scanning the dark for the detective, for the personally, for the trap they had set. The air was heavy, the scent of earth and bone a reminder of the stakes. A laugh low, mocking, unmistakably Fantomas echoed through the tunnels, and Holmes froze, his eyes narrowing. The phantom was there, his silhouette cloaked in black, his bag marked with a subtle pattern, his smile a taunt that spoke of chaos. "You've followed well," Fantomas said, his voice a velvet hum cutting through the dark. "But the game is mine." Holmes stepped forward, his voice steady, his words a challenge. "The game ends here," he said, his mind racing, his hand ready. The agent emerged from the shadows, her lantern casting a faint glow, her eyes fixed on the phantom. The trap was set, the alliance holding. But Fantomas laughed, his figure slipping into the dark, the coin's pattern a final taunt. Holmes and the agent moved as one, their steps silent, their lanterns converging, the tunnels narrowing to a single point. The clock struck 10, its chime a distant echo in the night, and the chase reached its crescendo, its end hidden in the catacombs' shadows. The Seine flowed on, its waters whispering of secrets yet to unfold, as Holmes and Moriarty, separated by distance but bound by purpose, had cornered Fantomas, their alliance a fragile victory in a game that refused to end. The world watched, its cities a stage for their uneasy dance, its air thick with the promise of a new dawn, where the phantom's laughter faded into the shadows, leaving only the hint of another chase in a world forever changed.